Hey there, Steve Cady here, and I'm going to share with you the change formula and the tipping point, two concepts used widely around the world. You can find out more at the links below. Let's jump in. Everybody is changing, everything, everywhere, every day. And if the definition of crazy, which I like this one, is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, well, the good news is the world's no longer crazy. And if we're not crazy, then what are we? What's going on with all this sanity that we're experiencing around the world, and how can we thrive in an ever-changing environment? I convened a group of thought leaders from around the world that are contributing to the Change Handbook, and we've had multiple conversations developing a list of the challenges that change agents and leaders and professionals and activists and organizers and scholars and students and educators are facing with regard to change initiatives. And here's a general consensus. Number one, that there's limited resources with the pressure to creatively share and leverage those limited resources. And the stakeholder groups that are working together to figure that out, they're not required necessarily to work together. So there's limited accountability. Yet they care about the issue, yet they're not required to work together on the issue. Maybe independently, but not together. There's differing levels of urgency and awareness with the problem. And there's varying levels of collaborative change skills that people are bringing to it to work together. And then you've got mandates to demonstrate the impact by leaders, stakeholder groups, funding agencies, and other people who are interested in the results from the change initiative. You got mandates to demonstrate impact with some ambiguity around what is an acceptable demonstration of that impact. And then you get this mindset, this bottom-up mindset and a desire to be involved and included from all the different stakeholders and the people impacted. And then you got this top-down bias and impatience to get things done now. Number 7 says that there's groups working on the problem independently at different times. And what that means is that there are groups that are working over here and working over there on the issue inside the system, amongst the stakeholder groups, amongst different areas, and they're not aware that others are working on the same problem, doing sometimes the same exact things. And sometimes the problem has been worked on 5 years before, 10 years before, 50, doing similar things, and they're not aware of the history and the previous work that's been done. And number 8 says that it's a challenge to get people to step up and take responsibility, particularly in a world where the rewards are for the individual. And it causes people to focus on the self first versus the greater good, and it's hard to get into a collaborative mindset. And number 9 says that once you get people in, you got to sustain the consistency, and the challenge is to sustain that consistency of contribution and motivation over time. People come in excited. How do you maintain that enthusiasm and momentum and keep it going? And last but not least, there's resistance to new language, new ideas. The old guard wants to stay in its comfort zone. And so if crazy is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, well, crazy really is less about our changing world. It's more about how we are going about changing. And if we use the same change and collaboration and innovation processes that we've always used and expect different results in our world, that is the definition of crazy. So the two concepts that we're going to focus on, the change formula and tipping point, we're going to look at history, research, the evolution, and really look at its evolution towards engaging large-scale change. So let's begin. It was in the early 1960s when Raymond Hayner, a chemist who worked on the Manhattan Project, well, he headed up the research and development at Arthur D. Little, a consulting firm in the behavioral sciences, working in organizations dealing with intractable problems. And Hayner not only wanted to unlock the mysteries of the physical sciences, he was really interested in the social sciences, and namely the organizational behavior and the behavioral sciences. And so he directed a gentleman by the name of David Gleicher and Barry Stein and a few others to take up the challenge. And then they hired a gentleman by the name of Sherman Kingsbury to facilitate the group. And they invited some other thought leaders into the conversation and to begin to work on these challenges within the context of the social science and the behavioral sciences in organizations and communities. And the group came together. Warren Bennis, Dick Beckhart, Ed Schein from MIT, Ken Benny from Boston University, and Chris Ardress from Yale. And this group became the founding group at Arthur D. Little, ADL, they became the founding group around organization development and change. Well, one day, this is quite fascinating. One day, as the group was meeting, David Gleicher, he got up and walked up to the chalkboard, and he wrote down this formula. And he explained to the group that it was nothing special, just common sense way of thinking about working that the group was doing, about the work that the group was doing. And to the group, however, the formula became a go-to framework, especially for difficult problems that required an incredible amount of energy. The formula was used then, it was used a little bit in different places. However, it didn't have broad appeal and it wasn't being used widely by those working on critical challenges, change-related challenges in the world. And then in comes Kathy Dannemiller. She had a common phrase that she would say, stand on the shoulders of giants. And this whole notion is an ancient philosophical concept that we can, if we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, we can see further. And Kathy stood on the shoulders of Ron Lippitt and Kurt Lewin. And what she had a particular skill in doing was popularizing and creating concepts that were accessible to larger groups of people. And so she took that formula and reframed it around D times V times F greater than R. Well, over time, that formula now has grown to add another variable, S, and the S represents the current nature of change in our world. Notice in the formula here that the formula is multiplicative, meaning that each of the variables, D, V, F, and S, must be in place in order to create conditions for real transformative change. So let's begin. Dissatisfaction. A person must be dissatisfied with the current state. And this gets at the notion of hope. Because by connecting dissatisfaction and recognizing and acknowledging it, it creates conditions of hope that maybe things can be different this time around. It's all about we are satisfied with the current state. And if we're satisfied with the current state, we aren't going to be like, okay, that's fine. Let's just keep it the way it's going, status quo. Well, we've got to change it. We've got to move to a condition where people are dissatisfied with the current state. In this one article on volunteer motivation, why some do more and others do less, these teams working on a critical issue in a community farming situation or farming community, they had teams. And what they found is that these volunteers and these stakeholder groups that were working together on the farming issue, those that had low confidence in their team's capabilities actually exerted more effort and performed better individually and collectively than those that had high confidence in their team. And so what it's saying is that, you've got to see that your team needs you, and the team's got to have room for improvement. So not only are we going to have to be dissatisfied with the issue that we're trying to address, we've got to be dissatisfied with the group that's been assembled and say that we could do better together. And if we do that, we get greater motivation out of each other. So you can be satisfied and happy. These two concepts are not the same. Happiness and satisfaction are not the same. You can be satisfied with your happiness, and you can be dissatisfied with your level of happiness. You can love your team, you can love your group that you're working in, and be really happy with them, but satisfied with where you are as a group. Satisfied with the issue dissatisfied with the issue that you're working on. So you can be satisfied with your level of unhappiness, and you can be dissatisfied with your level of happiness. Seriously, think about it. There are people that are completely satisfied being miserable. And even when you try to turn that frown upside down, the thumb is still going down. So a day of worry is more exhausting than a week of work. Being in a place of dissatisfaction, you don't want to stay there. You need to move off of that dissatisfaction and move to a place of what you yearn for. And that's looking at vision. That's where inspiration comes from. And so an ennobling vision of what you yearn to become, what you yearn for, is what's really key. So you take this particular research study, a group of accountants. There were 300 or so accountants. They took 150, put them in one room, took another 150, put them in another room. They sat in small groups. Both were given the same issue. One group was asked to solve the problem. The other group was asked to design a future state, a preferred future. What did they find? that when they watched the people in conversation in the small groups solving the problem, despair began to emerge. There was blame, band-aid short-term solutions, and a serious drain of human energy. Flip it, you look at the other side. If you look at the preferred future, there was hope, there was ownership, there were longer-term, deeper solutions being created, and there was enthusiasm and heightened energy. So at the core of it is purpose. And what do purpose and cigarettes have to do with this? Well, Viktor Frankl, in his groundbreaking research, wrote about Nazi war camp. He was a physician in the Nazi war camp, and he was trying to figure out how to help people live. And what he noticed is that the people that gave away all their cigarettes, because cigarettes were the currency in the camp. And so when people began to give away their cigarettes, he knew that they were going to die. Or he noticed and he observed that they died at a greater frequency, those that gave away their cigarettes. And he couldn't figure out, well, why was that? And what he found was that in looking and working with the people, that those that gave away their cigarettes had given up hope. They had given up and they had no purpose for living. And interestingly enough, some people who had purpose had worse health problems physically and were in worse shape physically. And those people who had purpose, something to live for, something to go back and do, their life wasn't done. They had a higher meaning, they had a calling, and they were clear about they had something to go back for, people they loved, reopening their business, a career to pursue, a meaningful pursuit of some import that related to them, that caused them to be able to survive and actually get through it, regardless of their physical condition. So at the heart of vision is this notion of purpose. And at the heart of purpose is when you are clear about purpose for your group, your team, and the greater purpose that you're aiming for, and a person is connected to that group, and that group is connected to the greater purpose, and there's connection there, then you have the ability for resilience and the ability for people to work through the tough times together because they're focused on that which matters, that ennobling vision of what they yearn for. It's not enough. You got your dissatisfaction, and now you're dissatisfied with where you are. You might be happy with your life, but you're dissatisfied with where you are, and you want it to be better. You move into this ennobling vision of what you yearn for, and you really get that inspiration. And now, rubber meets the road, commitment. The first steps are required in the short term, concrete actions to take in the short term to move you towards that vision must be in place. Not steps you take out long term. It's next week, it's next month, it's in the next 3 months. Concrete action to take. And you've got to get started now with it. So getting clear about that action and getting clear about who's in charge of what and that what you are specifically going to do makes all the difference to moving towards that commitment and being committed to moving forward individually and collectively. It's not enough. You got the D, you got the V, you got the F in place. Next is support, which really gets at perseverance. This gets at, and this is a new addition because many change initiatives are getting more complex. Greater stakeholder groups are involved, and people are moving in large systems together. And so what's important, not only at the individual level, at the large system level, is to have in place the necessary support and structures to follow through. We all know that on an individual level, social support, primary and secondary social support, makes a big difference in a person's ability to kick the habit, to get healthy, to overcome obstacles, and even to recover from surgery. What's interesting is that when people have secondary support, friends, co-workers, they are more able to recover and overcome old habits easier than if they have primary family support for that. So for example, smoking cigarettes, if you want to kick the habit, what's going to help you is not your family bugging you about it. What's going to help you is your coworkers and the people you work with. They'll help you create better, more healthy habits for yourself and for those that you work with. So the support is there, and it needs to be there in order to move yourself and your group towards success. So resistance is on the other side of the equation. D, V, F, and S must be greater than the resistance to change in order to create a transformative shift towards action. Let me give you an example. So there's this gentleman, this engineer, and he is on a platform that caught fire, an oil rig. And he's on the platform, and there's a helicopter flying around watching this whole fire emerge. Everybody was off. He was the last person on. And if he jumps, he is going to land and possibly smack right into the water. And you know, if you jump from a high space, it can hurt. It can even kill you. So he's got that. He's got sharks, cold water, and so at some point he jumps and survives. And the reporter says, why did you jump? And he said, it got too hot. And that's where the burning platform concept comes from. And so sometimes where we are, in the place that we stand, and where we're going, the unknown, maybe the fear of the unknown is greater than the fear of where we are. And so creating a burning platform is where you create conditions where you connect the dissatisfaction with an ennobling vision, with first steps, with supporting mechanisms. And in this case, he's not happy with where he's at, dissatisfied. I mean, he's not satisfied with where he's at, and he's definitely probably not happy either. Okay? So he's not satisfied with where he's at. The vision is that purpose. I want to live, but my life matters. My family matters. The first steps are jump and try to land so that you can survive the landing. The supporting mechanisms are their boats, and there's other people there to rescue him and get him out of the water quickly. All of that in place, when the product of that is greater than the resistance that he had standing on that platform, he was willing to jump from the place of where he was into the fear of what might be next. So the fear of jumping was less than the fear of staying on the platform. And notice again the multiplicative nature. If any one of these, D, V, F, or S, are 0, the whole thing cancels out. These 4 need to be in place and addressed. So the change formula began as an individual experience in understanding people and organizations. What about on a large scale? What about major change initiatives where we're aiming to bring a lot of people together to solve an intractable problem or to work on a critical issue? You got all these people with their own DVFS, And the tipping point is a great concept that relates to this. So the tipping point is that magic moment when an idea, trend, or a social behavior crosses a threshold, tips, and spreads like wildfire. Malcolm Gladwell talks about the notion of 150. We can pretty much manage 150 relationships in our life. Once we get beyond that, you got to break it down into groups of 150, so to speak. Well, Harold Jarsh says, I really like what he says here. How can those of us not in senior roles influence those who are in senior roles to embrace the idea that we are in a networked era and to act to create post-hierarchical organizations? So what he's talking about is we've got subgroups and people that have influence, social capital, and there's trust in all of these stakeholder groups and these people within these stakeholder groups. And how do we manage these groups? You've got the individual, you've got the group, and you've got the whole system. And in recognizing that, in recognizing the role and the capital we all bring, and the importance that trust plays in all of those relationships is key to moving people through the DVFS on an individual to a group to a collective level. And that is the key to creating real transformation. So you take people and groups, stakeholder groups, and they come together, and now they've got to connect their DVFSs in the group at the group level and get clear about what they're going to do. DVFS, and F being first steps clarifies, okay, we're going to go out and we're going to do these things next. So you converge together, get clear about DVFS as a group, and collectively all the key stakeholders, and then you diverge back out and you begin to do your work. Interestingly enough, you got to come back together. And those subgroups that are out working have to converge and diverge as they go. So you've got this concept of the individual, the group, and the whole. And when an individual's voice is recognized in the group and the group's voice is recognized in the whole, that is the key to change. Let me say a little bit more about that. Google has been doing some amazing research recently around how their teams and their groups perform such amazing tasks and solve some really challenging problems and do great work. And what is the difference between these perfect teams, if you will, these outstanding teams and regular teams? One of the things they found was that the teams that performed at that high level, they made sure that each person in the team had a voice, and then they collectively created a voice, and then they advocated outward to the greater whole organization in the system. So the idea is that they didn't let people get off the hook. What they did was they said, your voice matters, you're on the team, and we are inclusive. You are smart on our team, and we are collectively wise because of that. And it's a two-way street. You have responsibility to contribute because we need that smarts, and we need your voice, and we can go farther together because of that. The other thing that Gladwell talks about that I really like is this notion of sticky versus gimmicky. I'd like to read you a little case story here that was pretty impactful, talking about the notion of sticky versus gimmicky. How do you pitch? How do you pitch your idea? In the world of large-scale change, it's less about pitching, it's more about inviting. It's more about creating a pitch that is really an invitation to be a part of doing something together that we could not otherwise do. And so what happened here in this particular agricultural farming community, the growers have been following the official advice for sowing, spacing with minimum and between the rows, fertilizing, and with some good results for years. But they insist on sowing a handful of seeds in each hole instead of 5 to 10 recommended. And so what the group did that was looking at this issue, a small group, they developed a poster with the government and the assistance of the local university's art school. And on the poster, it showed a large number of people eating from a very small communal bowl of food, all looking rather hungry. The slogan read, "If too many try to eat from one bowl, there's not enough for all. Thin your crop." Supplementary posters were put up and reinforcement was done, messaging and all kinds of stuff, and they got no results. When all of this was done before the sowing season, and it didn't happen. Interestingly enough, this nice gimmicky, what they say here in this, a slogan that misfired. This slogan was created by a small group of people, and they didn't engage all the stakeholders that were really close to the issue and the people that would be directly impacted by it. It was created by a small group with the university and the art department, and it didn't work. Let me give you another example that I think really brings this to life as well. This idea of engagement comes in levels of 3. And so it's important to think about engaging people at level 1, level 2, level 3. Let me tell you a little bit more about that through the story of this particular project. This company was wrestling with technology not being stable. And so they had this major client that they were about to lose, and it was worth millions of dollars. And the reason was that they had just a few days and another problem and the system shut down. And they were looking to try to have incident-free days. That means the system up and working for multiple days. And what the management did is they said, you know what? Let's get together. Let's create a slogan. 80 days around the world. Let's have 80 incident-free days, when their average was like around 7. And they had a cookout. They made T-shirts and banners and put everything up. And they said, all right, let's go. And they made the edict. 80 days. Well, what happened was they had 8.9 days, I think. And they didn't see really any improvement. And they had 0 days, 5 days, and then an incident, 2 days an incident, 7 days and 2 days and an incident, and so forth. And what they found was morale decreased. People were less committed, and they were like, well, what's going on? Well, only one level had been engaged. That was the leadership had their own DVFS experience, and maybe the manager and some managers with that manager of the group had some of that level of DVFS. What's important is top leadership, mid-level leadership, the people that are working and organizing various aspects of the change initiative, right there, kind of the mid-level management group. That top-level leadership has to have their own individual and collective DVS experience. The mid-level group has to have their own individual and collective DVS experience. And the whole system needs to have its individual and collective DVS experience. And so when the consultants and those that were working with them explained what they needed to do in terms of bringing everybody together and creating an event or creating an experience where people got to connect around the D, the V, the F, the S. That's the key. Creating a common dissatisfaction with the current state. A common ennobling vision of what they yearn to achieve. A common set of first steps that they can take to move forward, and clear support from that mid-level and top-level leadership that we're going to follow through with public commitments and the kinds of structure and support with processes and resources to get it done. Well, management walked in to this event, bringing people together from the system that were actually managing and working on the system to keep it up and running. They were afraid and nervous. Their first reaction was the people on the front line working with it, dealing with the issue every day, they can't innovate. And the only thing was management was out of options. Everything they were doing wasn't working. They were about ready to lose the client. And so they said, go ahead and do it, but this better work. Well, they held the level 3 event. And the mid-level manager during the event was so amazed, he jumped up and he said, this is great work. Right now, let's go ahead and form working teams around specific issues. And he got a working team together. He got the issues that were identified by the group. He had the working team put together right there, and they began to work. And the notion of this better work went away. It went to this is going to work. And what happened the very next day is they saw an immediate increase to 25 days, then another down, and then 44 days, then 68 days, then 81 days, and it went on to 150, 200 days and counting. Just from one event, and that event was 2 hours long that brought the people together. So level 1, level 2, level 3, you got a management that is excited, you got implementation, you got inspired employees, and you get dramatic results. So here's the thing, in conclusion. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. All this is based on the article, and you can find it at the link below. Thank you, and I'm wishing you well on everything you're working on. Make the world a better place.